Send the life inside me, the giant Apache girl whispered the lone rancher. Samuel had always lived a quiet, simple life on his ranch in the Arizona desert. The land stretched for miles, dry and dusty, with patches of sagebrush, rocky hills, and narrow streams that shimmered in the hot sunlight. He loved the quiet, the wide open spaces, and the way the wind would whisper through the canyons in the evening. Most people thought his life was lonely, but Samuel didn't mind. He had his cattle, his horse, and the endless sky above him, and that was enough. Yet despite the beauty and peace of the desert, there was something about the vastness that could make a person feel small, almost invisible, like the land itself was too big for one man to ever fully understand. One summer afternoon, the sun was beating down harder than usual. Samuel was riding along the ridge to check his cattle, the hooves of his horse kicking up clouds of dust as they moved over the rocky ground. The air was thick and still, carrying the faint scent of dry earth and distant wildflowers. He had been living here for years, yet every day brought a little surprise from nature. A sudden hawk circling overhead, a lizard darting across a rock, or the way the shadows stretched across the canyon as the sun began to set. Samuel liked these small moments. They reminded him that even in a quiet, solitary life, there was always something worth noticing.
As he rode, something unusual caught his eye.
On a high cliff that jutted out from the canyon wall, he saw a figure. At first he thought it was just a trick of the light, or perhaps a large shadow cast by the rocks, but as he squinted, he realized it was a person. A girl. But she was unlike anyone Samuel had ever seen. She was enormous. Taller and broader than a normal child, with long dark hair that fell in waves over her shoulders. Her clothes looked worn but strong, simple fabrics that moved in the wind.
What startled Samuel most was her presence.
She didn't run or hide. She didn't even seem afraid. She just stood there, looking out across the desert as if she belonged to it in a way that no ordinary person could. For a moment, Samuel stayed still, unsure of what to do. His horse shifted nervously beneath him, sensing his hesitation.
Hello, he called softly, hoping not to startle her.
The girl didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned slowly toward him, her eyes wide and deep, like she carried the weight of 1,000 stories in her gaze. And then, almost as if the wind had carried her words to him, he heard a whisper. "Send the life inside me."
Samuel froze.
His heart beat faster, and a shiver ran down his spine. He had heard many things in his life, but never words like this, not spoken by anyone he had ever known. The words were soft, almost fragile, but they carried a strange urgency. It was a plea, a question, and a command all at once. Samuel didn't understand what she meant, yet somehow he felt he had to respond. Something about her presence, her voice, and the loneliness in her eyes made him feel a sense of duty he couldn't ignore. Breaths. He took a deep breath and moved closer, carefully, not wanting to scare her away. Vibration. I don't know how to do that, he said honestly, raising his hands in a gentle, peaceful gesture. The girl's eyes softened, but she didn't speak. Instead, she took a small step forward, and Samuel noticed something else. She was not like other children. Her movements were graceful but deliberate, each one heavy with purpose. She was strong, incredibly strong, yet there was a fragility to her, a sense that she had been carrying something inside her for a very long time. Over the next hour, Samuel stayed near the edge of the canyon, talking softly, telling her about the desert, the mountains, and the animals he cared for. The girl listened silently, occasionally nodding but never interrupting. It was clear she didn't fully understand all his words, but she seemed comforted by his voice. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The desert air grew cooler, and Samuel felt the first hint of the chill that the night would bring. He realized he couldn't just leave her there, alone and vulnerable. Breath. Not yet. Not after hearing her whisper that strange, haunting plea. Carefully, he suggested. You can come down. I have food, water, a place to rest. The girl hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the shadows of the canyon, then back at him, Ray. Finally, with a slow nod, she stepped down from the rocks. Samuel guided his horse closer, offering his hand as she descended. Her size made it difficult for her to move quietly, but she didn't stumble. She moved with a careful balance, like she had learned to live with her unusual strength. Yet the tension in her shoulders told Samuel that she had known hardship, perhaps even danger. Once she reached the ground, Samuel offered her water from his canteen. She accepted it without a word, her hands surprisingly delicate despite their size. She drank slowly, then looked at him, and for a brief moment Samuel felt a connection he could not explain. It was as if she was not just asking him to help her in that single whispered phrase, but asking him to understand her, to see her as she truly was. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from, but he knew he could not turn away. Night fell quickly in the desert. The stars emerged, one by one, shining bright against the deep black sky. Samuel guided her back to his ranch, a modest collection of wooden buildings surrounded by fences and dry fields. He gave her a simple blanket to sleep on and left some food nearby. She sat quietly, looking out into the dark desert, listening to the night sounds. The call of a distant owl, the rustle of the wind, the faint movement of the cattle. It was a soundscape Samuel knew well. But for her, it must have been new, or perhaps it reminded her of something lost. Samuel sat nearby, keeping a careful watch. He thought about what she had said, "Send the life inside me." He didn't understand it fully, but he knew it wasn't a request for something ordinary. It was a plea for help, for connection, for something deeper than food or water. We realized that this was not just about survival. It was about understanding, about giving care, patience, and attention to someone who had never known it. As the night deepened, Samuel noticed that the girl began to relax slightly. She leaned back on her hands, gazing at the stars. Occasionally, she would whisper something to herself, soft words that he could not hear. But Samuel understood that she had been carrying a great emptiness inside her, one that could not be filled by mere necessities. And yet, he felt a growing determination. He might be just a lone rancher, used to solitude and simple routines, but he could try. He could be the one to help her, even if he did not fully know how. By the time dawn arrived, painting the desert in soft shades of gold, Samuel had made a decision. He would help her. He would do whatever it took to understand her plea and to bring life back into her weary body and spirit. He didn't yet know what sending the life inside her meant, but he felt certain that it involved trust, care, and the quiet power of being seen. The girl, still silent, watched the sunrise with him, and in that moment Samuel felt the first stirrings of hope. The desert, vast and empty as it was, had brought them together in an unexpected, almost magical way. Samuel knew that their lives would change from this day forward, that this meeting on the canyon cliffs was the beginning of something extraordinary. And even though he didn't yet know the challenges ahead, he was ready to face them. For the first time in many years, Samuel felt the quiet thrill of purpose, not just as a rancher, but as a protector, a guide, and a friend to the mysterious giant Apache girl who had whispered to him in the desert, asking him to send the life inside her. Feeling the dry air fill his lungs, He glanced at her one more time. She was silent, yet her eyes reflected a quiet hope. And in that hope, Samuel knew that their story had only just begun. The morning sun spilled over the horizon, painting the desert in soft golden light. Samuel rose early, as he always did, moving quietly through the ranch to avoid startling the girl. He could hear her breathing gently, a rhythm steady and calm, though her presence still carried a weight he could feel deep in his chest. She had not spoken much since arriving, but her eyes, large, expressive, and almost impossibly deep, told him more than words ever could. Samuel realized that understanding her would take patience, trust, and perhaps more than he had ever given to anyone before. He started the day by bringing fresh water and some simple food. Bread, cheese, and a few fruits from a basket he kept for himself. He placed them carefully near where she was sitting, then stepped back to give her space. She looked at the offerings, her gaze shifting between him and the food. And finally, after a long moment, she reached out. Her hands were strong and steady, yet Samuel noticed a certain gentleness in the way she handled each item, as if every gesture was deliberate and meaningful. She did not speak, but she nodded once, acknowledging him. That small movement carried a weight of understanding, a silent thank you that spoke louder than words. Over the next few days, Samuel settled into a routine, though nothing about this routine was ordinary. He would tend to the cattle, fix fences, and repair buildings, all while keeping an eye on the girl. She moved through the ranch with quiet curiosity, observing everything but rarely touching anything that did not belong to her. Occasionally she would try to mimic his movements, feeding the animals, arranging supplies, or sweeping the floor, but her size made it awkward. Samuel would watch patiently, guiding her with gentle instructions, and she would listen, her expression serious, almost as if every new task was a challenge she was determined to master. Samuel began talking to her, telling her stories about the land, the animals, and his life as a rancher. At first, it seemed she did not understand much of what he said. Breath. She would tilt her head, her eyes reflecting a mixture of confusion and curiosity. But slowly, tiny gestures began to show that she was listening, absorbing the sounds and the rhythm of his voice. She would occasionally repeat words softly under her breath, testing them, as if trying to learn the language in her own way. Samuel realized that her silence was not emptiness. It was a form of listening, of learning, of observing the world in a way that he could barely understand. One afternoon, as the sun burned high overhead and the desert air shimmered with heat, Samuel noticed that she had wandered closer to the canyon edge again. He hurried after her, concerned, but when he arrived he saw something different this time. Stop! She was not standing alone, but crouched, examining a small lizard scuttling across the rocks. Her hands moved gently, careful not to frighten it. Samuel watched, fascinated. Despite her size and strength, she had a delicacy in her movements that spoke of deep awareness, of respect for life in every form. "Do you like the animals?" Samuel asked softly, stepping closer. She looked up at him, blinking slowly, and whispered, "Life." Her voice was faint but firm. She gestured toward the lizard, then back at him. Grasp. Samuel understood instantly. She was not just noticing the lizard. She was seeing life itself, the small, fragile existence of every creature around her. He nodded, smiling. "Yes, life. Every little thing has its place." She repeated the word, carefully enunciating it this time. Life. That evening, Samuel sat with her near the fire he had built outside the main cabin. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the unusual mixture of strength and vulnerability in her features. Samuel told her more stories, about the stars above, about how the desert had been home to people for thousands of years, about how animals survived the harsh conditions, and how the land itself had a voice if one knew how to listen. She sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the fire, absorbing every word. Occasionally she would whisper something back, a single word or phrase, but mostly she listened. Samuel began to realize that understanding her would not come from force or explanation, but from patience, from presence, and from shared experience. Days turned into weeks. The girl began to explore more of the ranch, always within Samuel's careful supervision. She would run along the fences, climb rocks, and occasionally, with a glance at Samuel, attempt to herd a few of the smaller animals. Breaths. Samuel helped her, guiding her movements and praising her efforts. The bond between them grew slowly, like water seeping into dry earth, almost invisible at first, but undeniable once it had begun. She started to smile sometimes, a rare and precious expression, and Samuel felt a warmth in his chest that he had not known in years. For her part, the girl seemed to grow stronger, more confident, yet there remained an emptiness in her eyes that he could not fill. One evening, while Samuel repaired a section of fence, he heard her whisper his name. He turned to see her sitting atop a rock, silhouetted against the orange sky. "Samuel," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Send life." He stopped what he was doing, walked over, and sat beside her. "I don't fully understand yet," he admitted honestly, "but I will try. I will help you find it." She looked at him with an intensity that made his heart race. It was not anger or frustration, but longing, a desire to be whole, to feel alive in a way she had never known. Over the following days, Samuel began experimenting with ways to help her feel more alive, more connected. He taught her how to milk the cows, how to gather eggs, how to ride a horse with balance and care. He took her to the small stream that ran near the edge of the ranch and showed her how to watch the water, listen to its movement, and understand its life-giving power. She was eager to learn, imitating his movements and slowly gaining confidence. Breath. Samuel realized that her plea for life was not about magic or medicine. It was about connection, experience, and understanding. It was about being part of the world in a way she had never been allowed to before. But at night, they would sit outside under the stars. Samuel would point out constellations, tell stories of the ancient people who had walked this land, and speak of hope and courage. The girl would whisper questions, simple, curious questions, and Samuel answered them patiently. Sometimes she would remain silent for hours, simply listening, her eyes reflecting the vastness of the desert sky. He began to see the spark inside her, small at first but growing, like a candle in the darkness. Despite these small victories, there were challenges. The girl's strength was incredible, but her body sometimes betrayed her. She would stumble, fall, or collapse from exhaustion, and Samuel had to rush to her side. He learned how to care for her, how to support her without scaring her, and how to encourage her without forcing her. Slowly, she began to trust him fully, allowing him to guide her and teach her. In turn, Samuel felt a new sense of purpose, a connection that transcended words. He had spent so many years in solitude, yet now he felt a partnership, a shared journey with someone who needed him as much as he needed her. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the desert, the girl pointed to a cactus in bloom and whispered, "Life." Samuel smiled. "Yes," he said, kneeling beside her. "Life is everywhere. It's in the plants, in the animals, in the wind, and in you." She looked at him, a slow, understanding smile forming on her face. Breaths. Samuel realized that this was the beginning of something profound. She was learning to see the world, and perhaps more importantly, to see herself as part of it. By the end of the second week, Samuel noticed a subtle but remarkable change. The girl moved with more ease, spoke with more confidence, and even laughed occasionally, a sound that made the desert seem lighter, brighter, almost alive in a new way. Samuel understood that the bond between them was the key. Trust, patience, and care were beginning to send the life inside her. It was not something he could force, but something that grew naturally, like a seed sprouting under the sun and rain.
As the evening sky turned deep purple and the first stars appeared, the girl climbed to her favorite rock, looking out across the desert.
Samuel joined her quietly, giving her space to breathe and reflect. Bears, she whispered softly, almost to herself. Thank you. Samuel shook his head gently. No. Thank you for letting me be part of this. She looked at him, eyes wide and bright, and for the first time Samuel felt that he truly understood the meaning behind her words, her plea for life. It was not a physical need alone. It was a desire to belong, to experience, and to feel the world fully. Burst. Samuel realized that this was only the beginning. The journey to help her would not be easy. There would be struggles, moments of doubt, and challenges that neither of them could foresee. Yet, in that quiet moment, under the stars, he felt hope. The giant Apache girl had begun to trust him, to rely on him, and to share her life with him in ways words could not express. And in return, Samuel's heart had begun to open, filling a space he did not know had been empty for so long. The desert, wide and unforgiving, had become a place of quiet miracles. Two souls so different yet connected by a single whispered plea were beginning a journey that would change both of their lives forever. Samuel knew that the path ahead would require patience, understanding, and courage. But he was ready. And for the first time in years he felt truly alive, as if the desert itself had whispered to him, showing that life in all its forms was worth fighting for. Bah. Samuel had grown accustomed to the rhythms of life with the giant Apache girl whose presence had slowly begun to change his own. But as much as progress had been made, he soon realized that the journey was far from simple. The girl's strength and curiosity were remarkable, yet there were moments when her body and spirit seemed to falter under a weight he could not see or touch. One morning after a restless night, Samuel found her sitting quietly on the porch of his cabin, her head resting in her hands. The sunrise lit her face, but the light did little to mask the sadness and emptiness in her eyes. "Good morning," Samuel said gently, moving to her side. She did not respond, only shifted slightly as if acknowledging him without words. He understood that some mornings would be like this, when the shadows of her past or the weight of her own emptiness would press down. He knelt beside her and offered water and some bread, hoping to provide comfort. She accepted them, but her movements were slow, heavy, as if each action required effort. Samuel realized that caring for her would require more than teaching her skills or sharing stories. It would require patience and understanding in the face of struggles that had no easy solution. Over the next days, Samuel tried different ways to help her regain her vitality and spirit. He introduced small routines, like walking together along the ridge, tending the animals, and exploring the small canyon nearby. For sometimes, these moments brought laughter and joy, the girl experimenting with her own strength, climbing rocks and testing her balance. But other times she would stumble, her strength leaving her suddenly, and Samuel would have to rush to her side. These episodes were frightening. He had grown to care for her deeply, and the thought of failing her filled him with unease. One afternoon, as the sun blazed high above the desert, she tried to climb a particularly steep rock near the canyon's edge. "Brations!" Samuel shouted a warning, but she did not hear him in time. She slipped, catching herself just barely on the edge. Her hands were scraped, and her breathing was heavy. Samuel ran to help her, supporting her as she steadied herself. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, whispering, "Life, not—" Samuel shook his head gently, taking her hands in his. "It's okay," he said softly. "We will take it slowly, by step."
You don't have to do it alone.
Breath.
She nodded, and for a moment the tension in her body eased.
Samuel realized that the struggle was not just physical. It was emotional. She had to learn to trust not only her strength but also the support of someone else. Bad. Samuel sought advice from local elders and native healers, hoping to find ways to help her regain her vitality. He asked about rituals, natural remedies, and practices that could restore energy and spirit. Each person he consulted offered guidance, but nothing seemed to provide the spark she needed. Samuel learned patience in a new way. He had to accept that some things could not be fixed immediately, that life could not be forced. Right. Instead, he focused on small victories. A day when she moved without stumbling, a moment when she smiled at a bird or a flower, a time when she spoke a word clearly and confidently. One evening after a particularly exhausting day, Samuel found her sitting near the small stream that ran beside the ranch. She had attempted to wade in the water but had retreated quickly, shivering from the cold. But beside her, offering a hand to steady her. "You're learning," he said gently. "Every step matters, even the small ones. Life comes in moments like these." She looked at him, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of frustration and hope. She whispered, almost to herself, "Life. Step." Samuel smiled softly. Yes, step by step. He realized that the life she had asked for was not a simple thing to give. It was a combination of courage, trust, experience, and understanding. As days passed, Samuel began to notice patterns. The girl had bursts of energy and clarity, followed by moments of fatigue and withdrawal. He learned to anticipate these cycles, adjusting their routines to match her strength. They would spend mornings tending the animals or exploring safe parts of the canyon, then retreat to the cabin for rest and quiet. Decimiel spoke gently to her during these quiet times, sharing stories from his past, memories of his own childhood, and lessons learned from the land. Slowly, she began to respond, whispering questions about the stories, occasionally asking for his guidance or repeating words he had taught her. Despite these small gains, the journey was not without setbacks. One afternoon, after a long morning of walking and observing the animals, the girl collapsed beside the barn, her breath rapid and uneven. Samuel rushed to her side, helping her sit upright and giving her water. Her hands shook slightly, and she whispered, "Tired. Life." Samuel knelt beside her, holding her hands firmly but gently. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe. We will rest now. Life is not only in action, it's also in patience. Breathe with me." Slowly, she began to mimic his deep, steady breaths. And Samuel realized that teaching her to sustain life was as much about teaching calm, balance, and trust as it was about movement or energy. Samuel also noticed that the girl's eyes sometimes carried a deep sadness that he could not fully reach. He understood that her struggle was not only physical but emotional and perhaps spiritual. She had spent so long without guidance, without understanding, without someone to truly see her. Samuel began to tell her stories of hope, courage, and resilience. He spoke of people who had overcome great obstacles, of animals that had survived harsh conditions, and of the desert itself, which thrived despite its apparent emptiness. The girl listened intently, absorbing the lessons silently, her lips moving slightly as if repeating them to herself. One day Samuel decided to take her to a higher ridge, one that overlooked the entire ranch and the canyon beyond. He wanted her to see the vastness of the world, to feel the strength in the land around her, and perhaps to feel a spark of life through connection with something larger than herself. She climbed carefully beside him, guided by his steady hand and quiet encouragement. When they reached the top, she gazed out across the desert, her eyes wide with awe. Samuel pointed to the distant mountains, the winding streams, and the scattered forests. "Life is everywhere," he said. "Look around. It is in every rock, every tree, every animal. And it is in you too. The girl whispered softly. Life. Me. Samuel nodded. Yes. You belong to it. That evening, as they descended from the ridge, Samuel noticed a small, tentative smile on her face. It was the first real smile he had seen in weeks. He understood that the struggle had not ended, but small victories were beginning to appear. The girl was learning to trust herself, to trust him, and to recognize the life within her. Samuel felt a quiet sense of hope. The path ahead would be long with more challenges than he could imagine, but the progress they had made together reminded him that perseverance and care could create change even in the most difficult circumstances. But Samuel knew the struggle was far from over. Each day brought a test of patience, resilience, and understanding. The girl's energy could vanish suddenly, or her spirit could falter when she faced obstacles she could not yet overcome. Samuel learned to meet these moments not with frustration, but with compassion. He had become her anchor, steadying her when she wavered and celebrating every small achievement with her. Their bond deepened, built not only on survival but on shared experiences, trust, and the quiet understanding that they were stronger together than alone. One night, as the wind rustled through the desert trees, the girl whispered to Samuel, "Life, help." He smiled, understanding that this was not a request for him to give her something he could conjure, but a plea for guidance, patience, and companionship. "Yes," he whispered back. "I will help." Every day, step by step, together. She nodded, resting her head on her knees, a soft, almost contented sigh escaping her lips. Samuel watched the stars above, realizing that the desert had become a place of learning, not just for the girl, but for him as well. He had learned that life was not something to be forced, but something to nurture, guide, and grow patiently. As sleep fell over the ranch, Samuel reflected on the journey so far. The girl had grown stronger in small, meaningful ways, yet the emptiness she carried remained a challenge. He understood that the next steps would require even greater patience, courage, and creativity. But in those quiet moments, watching her rest, he felt a sense of purpose deeper than he had ever known. He had embarked on a journey to help someone reclaim the life inside her, and in doing so, he had begun to discover a renewed life within himself. The struggles of the days to come would test them both, but Samuel knew they were not alone. Together, through patience, trust, and understanding, they could face whatever obstacles awaited them in the vast, unforgiving desert. And in the heart of those challenges lay the promise of hope, growth, and the life they were slowly learning to nurture day by day. The days had grown longer, warmer, and brighter, and Samuel began to notice subtle but remarkable changes in the giant Apache girl. Though her struggle had been long and sometimes discouraging, there was a new spark in her eyes, a quiet determination that had not been there before. Samuel watched her carefully as she moved through the ranch, tending to the animals with more confidence, climbing rocks with steadier balance, and exploring corners of the land she had once feared. Each small act seemed to strengthen not only her body but also her spirit. One morning, the girl awoke earlier than Samuel and quietly walked to the edge of the ranch, standing still and watching the sunrise. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and soft pinks, the light spilling across the desert like liquid fire. Samuel joined her, approaching slowly, giving her space to absorb the beauty around her. "It's a new day," he said softly. She looked at him, eyes wide, almost glowing with anticipation. She whispered, "Laugh." He nodded, understanding the depth behind the simple word. "Yes, life. Every day brings new life. Every day brings new chances." That day, Samuel decided to take a different approach. He realized that all the lessons, all the small steps, had been important, but she needed to feel something larger than the ranch, larger than the daily routines. She needed to connect with the desert itself, to feel that she was part of the world, part of the life that surrounded her. He led her toward the canyon cliffs that stretched beyond the ranch, choosing a path that was safe but still challenging. Breaths. Along the way, he pointed out the plants, the way the sunlight touched the rocks, and the tiny insects moving through the sand. "Everything here is alive," he said. "Pfft. Even the smallest creature matters. Even the smallest movement matters." She listened carefully, her eyes following every motion, her hands reaching out to touch the earth, the stones, and the plants. Occasionally she would crouch, examining a small flower or lizard, whispering to it as if acknowledging its life. Samuel realized then that she was beginning to understand what he had tried to teach her all along, that life was not something to be given. It was something to be recognized, nurtured, and embraced. It existed not only outside of her but also inside her, waiting to be awakened. As they reached the highest cliff overlooking the canyon, Samuel noticed her pause, taking in the vastness before her. The wind whipped around them, lifting her hair and tugging gently at her clothes. She took a deep breath, then another, her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that seemed more confident than it had in weeks. She looked at Samuel, a question in her eyes that did not need words. "Life," she whispered again. Samuel smiled. "Yes, life is here. Life is you. Life is everywhere. And now you can feel it inside yourself." For the first time, she stepped forward without hesitation, moving closer to the edge and extending her hands toward the canyon below. She felt the wind rushing past her, felt the sun warming her face, and for a moment she laughed, a clear, ringing sound that echoed across the rocks. Samuel's heart lifted at the sound. It was a laugh that had not been heard in months, a sound of pure awakening, a sound that told him she had begun to reclaim the life that had once seemed so distant. They spent the day exploring the cliffs, the girl moving with grace and confidence, occasionally turning to Samuel for reassurance but increasingly relying on her own judgment. She climbed rocks with strength, leapt across small crevices, and examined plants and insects with curiosity and delight. Samuel watched, proud and amazed, seeing the transformation unfold before his eyes. The girl who had once whispered for life now seemed to radiate it, her presence vibrant and full of energy. That evening, as the sun began to set, Samuel guided her back to the ranch. They walked slowly, speaking little, letting the silence carry them. The desert had become a place of renewal, a place where life could be rediscovered, not imposed or forced. Back at the ranch, Samuel prepared a simple meal and they ate together. For the first time, she spoke more freely, asking questions, repeating words, and even sharing small observations about the day. Samuel realized that communication had become easier, not because he had taught her everything, but because she had begun to trust herself and her place in the world. Over the next few days, the change became undeniable. She moved with purpose and confidence, her laughter became more frequent, and she even began to take initiative in caring for the animals. Samuel noticed her teaching herself, experimenting with tasks in ways he had not anticipated. Sometimes she would climb higher rocks or attempt more challenging movements, her energy seemingly limitless. And though she still occasionally faltered, Samuel was always there to support her, to guide her, and to remind her that life was not about perfection. It was about growth, courage, and resilience. One afternoon they sat near the stream, watching the water flow over rocks and pebbles. Samuel pointed to the water, explaining how it nourished the plants, gave life to the animals, and sustained the desert itself. The girl listened attentively, then dipped her hands into the cool water, letting it run through her fingers. She looked at Samuel, eyes shining with understanding. "Life," she whispered. Samuel nodded.
Yes, life flows in all directions.
It is inside you, and it surrounds you. You are part of it, and it is part of you. Brash. She smiled at him, a full, radiant smile, the kind that could light up the darkest corners of the desert. Samuel felt a profound sense of relief and joy. For months, he had worried, wondered, and hoped. Now, he could see that his patience, care, and guidance had begun to bear fruit. Desperation, she had found a spark within herself, a life force that had been dormant, waiting for someone to help awaken it. And in doing so, Samuel felt that his own life had been transformed as well. A pass. He was no longer just a lonely rancher. He was a teacher, a guardian, and a companion to someone extraordinary. As the stars emerged in the night sky, Samuel and the girl sat together outside the cabin. The girl rested her head on her knees, her expression peaceful and thoughtful. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Thank you, life." Samuel shook his head gently. "No. Thank you," he said, "for letting me be part of it, for trusting me, for letting life return to you." She looked up at him, eyes bright with emotion, and for the first time Samuel felt a full understanding of what her plea had truly meant. It had never been about a single act or a single moment. It had been about connection, understanding, and the slow, steady return of vitality to her mind, body, and spirit. The breakthrough was not sudden or magical. It was gradual, built on small victories, quiet trust, and countless shared moments of patience and care. The girl's awakening was a testament to resilience, to the power of empathy, and to the profound impact one person could have when they chose to care deeply for another. But Samuel realized that life was not only in movement or speech, it was in presence, attention, and the willingness to nurture. In the days that followed, the girl's confidence grew even further. She began to explore more independently, climb higher, run faster, and engage with the world around her in ways that Samuel could hardly have imagined. Her laughter became a regular part of life on the ranch, echoing across the open desert and lifting the spirits of both human and animal alike. Samuel felt a renewed sense of purpose, seeing that his own life had been enriched as much as hers. Together, they had discovered that life was not something to be simply given. It was something to awaken, nurture, and experience fully. One morning, Samuel awoke to find the girl already awake and moving about the ranch with energy and purpose. She called to him, "Samuel, come see!" He hurried outside to find her standing proudly atop a small ridge, arms outstretched, looking as if she owned the desert. Samuel approached, smiling, and she turned to him, eyes sparkling with triumph. "Life," she whispered again, this time with certainty, with recognition, and with a sense of joy that could not be contained. Samuel nodded, understanding fully now that the journey they had shared, the struggles, the patience, and the trust, had brought her to this awakening. She had found the life inside herself. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Samuel and the girl spent the day exploring together, her curiosity unbounded, her movements confident and assured. She climbed rocks, examined plants, and played with the animals, each action filled with awareness and appreciation. Vespus. Samuel watched, proud and amazed, realizing that this moment, the awakening of her spirit, was the culmination of months of care, guidance, and trust. It was a triumph not just for the girl, but for both of them. A reminder that life could be restored through patience, connection, and compassion. As night fell, Samuel and the girl sat outside watching the stars glitter across the desert sky. The girl rested her head against his shoulder, her presence peaceful and content.
Samuel life,
she whispered softly. Samuel smiled, holding her hand gently. "Yes," he said, breaths. "Life inside you. Life around you. Life that we share. For the first time, the vast, quiet desert felt full, not just with the sounds of wind and animals, but with the vibrant energy of a life reclaimed, a spirit awakened, and a bond that would last forever. The days following the girl's awakening were filled with a sense of quiet joy and purpose. Samuel had watched her grow stronger, more confident, and more alive than ever before, and he felt a deep sense of pride and relief. But he also knew that their journey was not just about strength or courage. It was about connection, trust, and the bond they had forged over time. The girl had learned to embrace life, to move with confidence, and to see herself as part of the world. But yet the bond they shared, the unspoken understanding between them, was perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all.
Every morning, Samuel and the girl would rise with the sun.
Bye. She moved with ease across the ranch now, feeding the animals, checking the fences, and exploring the land with a curiosity and energy that seemed boundless. Bed. Samuel watched her, noticing how she had begun to take initiative, testing her strength, learning from her mistakes, and finding joy in every small accomplishment. She would laugh freely, run along the open fields, and climb rocks she had once feared. Each day, Samuel felt that he was witnessing not just a return of life, but a full blossoming of spirit, a life that had been dormant and was now vibrant, full, and unstoppable. One afternoon, Samuel decided to take her beyond the ranch, further into the desert than they had ever gone. He wanted her to see the world in its vastness, to understand that the life she had found inside herself was connected to everything around her. They traveled together along winding trails, past rocky hills and dry riverbeds, through groves of twisted trees, and across plains dotted with wildflowers. The girl moved confidently beside him, stopping occasionally to touch a plant, examine an insect, or simply feel the wind on her face. She was learning that life was not only in herself, but in every living thing around her, in every stone, plant, and animal. As the sun began to set, they reached a high cliff that overlooked a wide valley. The view was breathtaking, a vast expanse of desert stretching to the horizon, mountains rising in the distance, and the sky painted in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. The girl stepped forward, arms outstretched, and breathed deeply.
Life, she whispered, a word that now carried certainty, joy, and understanding.
Samuel watched her with awe. He had seen her grow from a fragile, uncertain child into a young woman who radiated strength, confidence, and vitality. He realized that this moment, the culmination of months of care, patience, and trust, was a turning point. She had truly claimed the life inside her. Over the following weeks, the girl became more than just a presence at the ranch. She became an essential part of it. She tended to the animals, learned the rhythm of the land, and even began teaching Samuel new things, showing him her observations, insights, and ideas. The relationship had evolved into a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. Samuel felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had not only helped her, but had also learned from her resilience, curiosity, and perspective on life. Together, they were stronger, happier, and more complete than they had ever been alone. The local community began to notice the changes as well. Travelers passing through would speak of the giant Apache girl who had come to the ranch, and of the lone rancher who had guided her to life and strength. People were curious and often cautious, but those who visited could see the bond between them, the care Samuel showed her, and the energy she now carried. She greeted visitors with quiet confidence, and Samuel noticed that she had learned the value of patience, empathy, and observation in dealing with others. The story of their journey began to spread quietly, a tale of hope, courage, and the transformative power of care and trust. One evening, as the desert sky turned deep blue and stars began to glitter across the horizon, Samuel and the girl sat outside the cabin, sharing a simple meal. She looked at him, eyes reflecting both joy and gratitude, and whispered,
Samuel!
Thank you!
Blythe. He shook his head gently, smiling. No, thank you, he replied, for letting me be part of it, for trusting me, for sharing yourself with me. They sat together in silence, the wind carrying the sounds of the desert, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of the wind through the sagebrush, and the gentle movement of the animals settling for the night. In that quiet, Samuel realized that the life he had helped awaken was now fully present, not only within her, but within himself as well. Over time, the girl began to explore new horizons. Samuel taught her more than survival skills. He shared stories of courage, lessons from the land, and the importance of empathy and understanding.
She learned to care for others, to notice the smallest details of life, and to value the connections she formed with both humans and animals.
Samuel, in turn, learned from her resilience, her unique perspective, and her ability to find joy in moments he had once considered ordinary.
Their partnership had grown beyond simple guidance. It had become a shared journey of growth, learning, and fulfillment.
One afternoon, Samuel watched as she climbed a rocky hill, her movements confident and sure. She reached the top and turned, eyes shining, looking out over the desert. Life, she whispered again, this time with pride and certainty. Samuel felt his heart swell. He knew that the girl had not only found life within herself, but had also become a part of the desert, the land, and the world around her. She had learned that life was not something given, it was something nurtured, experienced, and shared. And in that sharing, Samuel realized life had returned to him as well. As months passed, the girl's presence became a symbol of hope and perseverance. Samuel often reflected on the journey they had shared, the struggles, the small victories, the moments of doubt, and the moments of triumph. He understood that their story was not extraordinary because of magic or mystery, but because of patience, trust, and a willingness to care deeply for another being. The giant Apache girl had reclaimed her life, and Samuel had grown in ways he could never have imagined, learning lessons about resilience, empathy, and the power of connection. One evening, as they sat by the fire under a sky full of stars, the girl leaned her head on Samuel's shoulder. "Samuel," she whispered, "life." "Thank you." Samuel smiled, his heart full. "No, thank you," he said softly, "for letting me be part of your journey. For trusting me, for being you." The girl's eyes reflected the starlight, bright and alive, and Samuel knew that the life they had nurtured together would continue to grow, both within them and in the world around them. The ranch had transformed as well. No longer just a place of solitude, it had become a home filled with laughter, learning, and the quiet beauty of shared life. Animals thrived, plants grew stronger, and the desert, vast and seemingly empty, seemed alive with energy and purpose. Travelers and neighbors would occasionally come by, drawn by the stories of the girl and the rancher, and they would leave inspired by the care, trust, and patience that had brought life back to a once fragile soul. Samuel and the girl welcomed each visitor with kindness, offering lessons, stories, and sometimes a quiet word of encouragement. In time, the girl's confidence blossomed fully. She explored beyond the ranch more often, observing the desert, the streams, and the wildlife. She learned to read the land, to anticipate changes in weather, and to move safely and gracefully across the rocks and hills, brisk. Samuel watched her with pride, realizing that she had not only regained her strength but had also grown into a young woman who could face the world with courage, wisdom, and joy.
Yet even as she explored and grew, she never forgot the bond she shared with Samuel.
They continued to share quiet moments together, watching the sunset, listening to the sounds of the desert, and speaking softly to one another. Their relationship had become one of mutual respect, understanding, and enduring connection. Samuel often reflected that helping her find life had, in turn, brought a new life to his own. He had gone from a solitary rancher to a mentor, companion, and friend to someone extraordinary, and he knew that this bond would last forever. One day, as they walked along a ridge overlooking the valley, the girl turned to Samuel and whispered, "Life together." Samuel smiled, understanding fully. Life had returned to her, not just in body and mind, but in spirit. Breaths. She had learned to embrace herself, the world around her, and the connections that made life meaningful. And Samuel, in helping her, had discovered the same truths: trust, patience, empathy, and the joy of sharing life with someone who truly matters. As the sun set over the desert that evening, casting long shadows across the land, Samuel and the girl stood side by side. The wind whispered through the rocks and sagebrush, carrying with it a sense of peace, hope, and enduring life. The giant Apache girl, once fragile and uncertain, now radiated strength, confidence, and vitality. And Samuel, the lone rancher, had found a renewed sense of purpose, friendship, and joy. Together, they had not only sent life inside her, but had discovered the true meaning of life itself: connection, growth, and the courage to embrace the world fully. The story of Samuel and the giant Apache girl became a quiet legend in the local community, a tale of hope, patience, and the transformative power of care. Travelers would speak of the girl who had found life with the help of a kind rancher, and of the rancher who had opened his heart to guide and nurture a fragile, extraordinary soul. Yet for Samuel and the girl, it was never about legend or recognition. It was about the journey they had shared, the life they had nurtured, and the bond that would endure forever. Even in the vast, quiet desert, their story proved that life could be awakened through patience, trust, and love. And as the stars shone above them, the girl whispered one last time, softly but firmly, "Life inside me, breaths, forever." Samuel nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "Yes," he whispered, "forever."